My wife texted from her parents' house. I'm not coming home until you buy me a new SUV. I replied, understood. Then I downgraded her phone, canceled her subscriptions. 48 hours later, her father called to negotiate her surrender. I, 34M, never thought my wife's sense of entitlement would reach nuclear levels, but apparently I underestimated her. The text arrived while I was reviewing quarterly reports at my office downtown, the familiar ping of my phone interrupting my concentration. Her message was simple, direct, and absolutely infuriating in its presumption. She wasn't coming home until I bought her a new SUV. Not asked, not discussed, demanded. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, reading those words over and over. My wife had driven to her parents' house the night before after our argument about finances. We'd been going through a rough patch. Money was tighter than usual with the economic uncertainty, and I'd suggested we postpone some non-essential purchases. Apparently, the luxury SUV she'd been eyeing fell into the essential category in her mind. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was making demands from the comfort of her childhood bedroom, while I was working 12-hour days to keep our household afloat. The SUV in question wasn't some practical family vehicle either. We didn't have kids. It was a $70,000 status symbol with heated leather seats and a premium sound system. I typed back a single word, understood. Then I set my phone aside and returned to my work, but my mind was racing. If my wife wanted to play hardball, I could play too. She'd forgotten one crucial detail in her power play. All our accounts were joint, yes, but I was the primary account holder on everything. The phone plan, the streaming services, the gym membership, the credit card she used for her daily Starbucks runs and weekend shopping trips. By lunch, I'd made my first call. The phone company was surprisingly accommodating when I explained I needed to downgrade one of the lines on our family plan. I switched her unlimited premium plan to the most basic option available. No more unlimited data, no more international calling, no more premium features. Just the bare minimum. The streaming services were next. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Spotify Premium, her yoga app subscription, the meal delivery service she'd signed us up for. One by one, I canceled them all. Each cancellation felt like removing a small weight from my shoulders. I left the gym membership for last, partly because I knew it would sting the most. She'd been posting workout selfies religiously for the past 2 years, and the boutique fitness studio she attended cost more per month than most people's car payments. By evening, I was sitting in our suddenly peaceful house, ordering pizza and watching free television. My phone had been blissfully quiet all day. Her downgraded plan meant no more constant notifications, no more social media updates, no more endless group chats with her friends. The first crack in her resolve came the next morning. A text arrived, short and confused, asking why her phone wasn't working properly. I replied that I'd optimized our monthly expenses, just like she'd been asking me to do for months. Technically true, though not quite in the way she'd meant. Day 2 brought more texts, increasingly frantic as she discovered each canceled service. She couldn't watch her shows, couldn't stream music during her morning jogs, couldn't access her meditation app. I responded to each complaint with calm understanding, suggesting she could always use the free versions or visit the local library for entertainment. The real meltdown happened when she tried to grab coffee with her friends and discovered I'd also put a temporary hold on her primary credit card. Not canceled, just frozen, pending what I'd told the bank was a security review. Her backup card worked fine, but it had a much lower limit, and she'd apparently been living closer to that edge than I'd realized. I spent that evening researching divorce attorneys, not because I was ready to file, but because I wanted to understand exactly where I stood. The consultation was enlightening. Our prenup, which she'd insisted on back when we married, actually worked more in my favor now that my career had taken off and hers had stagnated. Wednesday brought silence. No texts, no calls, nothing. I wondered if she was finally ready to have an adult conversation about our finances and her unrealistic expectations. I was almost looking forward to it. Instead, I got a call that evening from her father. He started off friendly enough, asking how I was doing, making small talk about work. Then he got to the point. He wanted to know if we could work something out. His daughter was, in his words, struggling with the current situation. I told him I was struggling too, working long hours to support a lifestyle that was becoming increasingly unsustainable while my wife made ultimatums from his guest bedroom. He tried a different approach, suggesting that marriage was about compromise, about finding middle ground. He offered to mediate a discussion between us. I asked him if he thought holding our marriage hostage over a luxury vehicle was compromise. The conversation grew tenser. He mentioned that his daughter was used to a certain standard of living, that she'd grown up with nice things. I reminded him that she'd also grown up in his house, not paying her own bills. He finally got to his real point. What would it take to resolve this situation? I told him it wasn't about the SUV anymore. It was about the fact that his daughter thought she could manipulate me with threats and ultimatums. It was about her complete disconnect from our financial reality. It was about the fact that she'd rather run home to daddy than have a mature conversation with her husband. He asked what I wanted from her. I wanted an apology. I wanted acknowledgement that her approach was wrong. I wanted a serious discussion about our finances and our future that didn't involve demands and threats. And I wanted her to understand that our marriage was a partnership, not a dictatorship. He said he'd talk to her. Thursday morning brought the breakthrough I'd been waiting for, though not in the way I expected. Her mother called me at work, something that had never happened in the 7 years I'd known the family. She was apologetic, embarrassed even. She explained that they'd raised their daughter to expect certain things, maybe too much. She admitted they'd been enabling her behavior by taking her side automatically. She asked if there was anything she could do to help fix this situation. I told her I appreciated the call, but this was between my wife and me. However, I was glad someone in the family was finally seeing the bigger picture. She mentioned that my wife had been crying for 2 days, not just about the SUV or the canceled services, but about the possibility that our marriage was in real trouble. She'd apparently started to realize that I might not just give in this time. That afternoon, my wife finally called. Not texted, called. Her voice was small, different from the confident woman who'd made demands just days earlier. She started by asking if I hated her. I told her I didn't hate her, but I was deeply disappointed in how she'd handled our disagreement. She wanted to know if I was planning to divorce her. I explained that I was hoping we wouldn't get to that point, but her ultimatum had forced me to consider all possibilities. She asked about the canceled services, whether they were permanent. I told her that depended on whether she was ready to have an honest conversation about our finances and our future. The conversation lasted 2 hours. She cried. I stayed calm. She apologized, though it felt more like regret at being caught than genuine remorse for her actions. She promised to come home if I would restore her phone plan and credit card access. I told her that wasn't how this worked. She could come home because she wanted to work on our marriage, not because I'd met her conditions for returning. She went quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked what she needed to do. Update 1. Friday evening, she came home. No fanfare, no dramatic reconciliation scene. She simply walked through the front door with her overnight bag and found me in the kitchen making dinner. The conversation was awkward at first. She apologized again, this time seeming more genuine. She admitted that running to her parents had been childish and that making demands about the SUV was wrong. I listened, but I wasn't ready to just move on. I told her that we needed to have some serious discussions about our relationship and our finances. I also made it clear that the trust between us had been damaged by her ultimatum approach. She asked about her phone and credit cards. I explained that I'd restore everything gradually as we rebuilt trust. The phone plan would go back to normal immediately, but the credit cards and subscriptions would come back as we worked through our issues together. She wasn't happy about this arrangement, but she didn't argue. I could see her processing the fact that her old tactics weren't going to work anymore. We spent the weekend having the financial conversation we should have had months ago. I showed her our actual budget, our savings, our debt, everything. She was shocked at how tight things actually were. She'd been living in a bubble, assuming money would always be available for whatever she wanted. The SUV discussion was particularly eye-opening for her. When she saw the actual numbers, the monthly payment, insurance, registration, maintenance, she finally understood why I'd been resistant. We could technically afford it, but it would mean cutting back on savings, retirement contributions, and emergency funds. She suggested we could afford it if we cut other expenses. I pointed out that most of our discretionary spending was already hers: the gym, the subscriptions, the frequent shopping trips, the expensive coffee habits. This led to a broader conversation about our different approaches to money. She'd grown up in a family where money was never discussed, where wants were treated as needs. I'd grown up more modestly, where every purchase was considered carefully. By Sunday evening, we'd reached a tentative agreement. She would take over managing certain household expenses to better understand where our money went. We'd set up a system where any purchase over a certain amount required discussion and agreement from both of us. And we'd work with a financial planner to set realistic goals for both saving and spending. The SUV was off the table for now, but we agreed to revisit it in 6 months if our financial situation improved. Update 2. 2 weeks later, things were settling into a new normal. My wife had taken over grocery shopping and utilities management as part of our new arrangement. The first time she came home from the grocery store genuinely shocked at how much we spent on food, I knew the lesson was sinking in. Her attitude toward money was changing slowly but noticeably. She started looking for sales, comparing prices, questioning whether we really needed certain items. The woman who used to buy premium everything was suddenly discovering store brands. I'd restored most of her subscriptions, but we'd agreed to share accounts where possible and eliminate redundancies. Instead of each having our own Netflix and Spotify accounts, we shared. Instead of 2 different fitness memberships, she found a more affordable gym. The real test came when her friends invited her to an expensive spa weekend. The old version of my wife would have booked it immediately and worried about the cost later. Instead, she talked to me about it. We looked at our budget together and decided we couldn't afford it that month. She suggested a more affordable alternative to her friends instead. Her parents had been surprisingly supportive of our new approach. Her father called to apologize for enabling her financial irresponsibility. Her mother started sharing budgeting tips and family recipes to help us save money. It was like they'd been waiting for someone to finally set boundaries with their daughter. The marriage counseling we'd started was helping too. We were learning to communicate about difficult topics without ultimatums or threats. My wife was beginning to understand how her demands had felt like emotional blackmail, and I was learning to express my concerns before they built up into resentment. But the biggest change was in how my wife saw our partnership. She'd started referring to purchases as our money, instead of just assuming access to whatever she wanted. She asked for my input on decisions, not permission, but genuine collaboration. The trust was rebuilding slowly. I'd restored her full credit card access, but she was using it more responsibly. She'd even started paying it off weekly instead of monthly to keep better track of spending. Update 3. A month after the SUV ultimatum, my wife brought up the subject again, but in a completely different way. Instead of demanding or expecting, she'd done research on more affordable options, looked into certified pre-owned vehicles, and even considered whether we actually needed a second car at all. She'd calculated that selling her current car and using public transportation or ride-sharing for her daily needs might actually save us money. The bus route to her job was convenient, and she could use the walking for exercise instead of paying for a gym membership. I was impressed by the complete turnaround in her thinking. Instead of wanting a more expensive vehicle, she was considering whether she needed one at all. We ultimately decided to keep her current car, which was reliable and paid off, but we used her research as the foundation for planning future vehicle purchases. Everything was now viewed through the lens of necessity versus want, long-term financial impact, and how it fit into our broader goals. The whole experience had taught us both important lessons. For my wife, it was about the difference between partnership and entitlement, between financial awareness and ignorance. For me, it was about the importance of setting boundaries early instead of letting resentment build up. Our marriage was stronger for having weathered this crisis, but I knew it could have easily gone the other way. If she'd remained at her parents' house, if she'd continued with ultimatums and demands, if she'd been unwilling to examine her own behavior, we probably would have ended up in divorce court. 3 months later, we'd paid off 2 credit cards and built up our emergency fund to a comfortable level. My wife had discovered she actually enjoyed budgeting and financial planning, treating it like a puzzle to solve rather than a restriction on her freedom. The irony was that by learning to live on less, we'd actually created more financial freedom. We had options now, choices that hadn't existed when every dollar was immediately spent on the next want or desire. Her friends had noticed the changes too. Several of them had asked for budgeting advice, inspired by how we'd turned our finances around. My wife had become something of a reformed spender, sharing her experience with others who were struggling with similar issues. Looking back, That text message demanding an SUV had been a blessing in disguise. It forced us to confront issues that had been festering beneath the surface of our marriage. My response, cutting off her financial access, had been harsh but necessary to break through years of enabling and entitlement. The lesson wasn't really about money, though that was the catalyst. It was about respect, partnership, and the difference between a marriage where both people are working toward common goals versus one where someone feels entitled to make unilateral demands. Today, when my wife wants something expensive, we research it together, budget for it together, and make the decision together. And when she texts me from wherever she happens to be, it's usually to share a deal she found or to ask if we need anything while she's out. The SUV is still just a possibility for the future, but now it's our possibility, not her demand. And that makes all the difference.